Let's have a look at our top story this morning. And in the last hour, NatWest has posted profits beating forecasts significantly.
Yeah, they've reported a pre-tax profit of £3.6 billion for the period compared to £2.6 billion the prior year and above the £3.3 billion they forecast.
Well, this comes after the head of Coutts Bank, which of course is all part of NatWest, Peter Flavell, resigned as NatWest is trying to contain a crisis. It's all to do with Nigel Farage and debanking that might have wiped £1 billion off its share price.
Yes, and then you also look at the group's chairman, Sir Howard Davis, because his future looks a little bit wobbly at the moment because Rishi Sunak has refused to give his backing to him.
OK, let's talk to our political reporter, Katherine Forster, who's here in the studio. Good morning.
Good morning.
I mean, it's fascinating with the pre-tax profits because, I mean, whilst this has all rumbled on, of course, it's not happened recently enough to affect the pre-tax profits for the last year, has it? But it shows a very healthy bank, which we own 40% of very nearly, but one that is still, nevertheless, in crisis at the top.
Certainly is in crisis, and they've clearly been doing rather well, haven't they? Because their profits in half year to the end of June are up by £1 billion. That's more than was expected. It would be expected to be 3.3, and it's actually 3.6 billion. But those are to the end of June, and in the last couple of days, NatWest Group have been engulfed by this tsunami of really terrible publicity because of having debanked Nigel Farage, as we now know, primarily for his political views. It's cost two big bosses their jobs already. Dame Alison Rose, the boss of NatWest, although allegedly she will probably get a £5.2 million severance package. That was her annual...
It's a golden handshake for you, isn't
salary.
it?
We may not know till they put their, end-of-year accounts through. And yesterday it cost Peter Flavell, the Coutts boss, his job as well. And now all the questions about what happens to Sir Howard Davies, the chairman. Now, Nigel Farage has been calling for him and indeed the whole board to go because, of course, what happened when Dame Alison Rose finally admitted that, yes, she'd been the source of this inaccurate story to the BBC, implying it was only that Nigel Farage didn't have sufficient funds. Initially, the board were, well, we've got full confidence in her and she's staying. And it was only when pressure was clearly brought to bear by Number 10, by the Chancellor, that they had this sort of middle-of-the-night board meeting, and then she went at sort of 1:30 in the morning. But a terrible look, and the irony is that from the 40 pages of documentation that Nigel Farage got, which detailed very clearly, they've been tracking things like he'd retweeted a tweet from Ricky Gervais making a joke against trans women. He was friends with Novak Djokovic, all this stuff.
Oh, my goodness, that's terrible,
They
isn't it?
decided that it was a terrible look for them to have him. But, of course, most people wouldn't have known he had a bank account with Coutts. And I think most people would now think what's a terrible look is, A, breaking client confidentiality, which you're clearly not supposed to do, and B, deciding somebody can't have an account because of their
Well, you see, that's what is annoying me about... I've just been away, so I've been reading about it in the papers and things like that. And there's this... Some people have got it wrong. They feel it's all about Nigel Farage. And those who don't like him sort of think, well, what's the fuss about? But it's not just... and Nigel's making that point. It's not just about him. He just happens, at the moment, to be the most public figure affected.
He's a bit like the canary in the coal mine, isn't he? Because it's emerging now that this is happening and has been happening to many, many people. Gina Miller, the prominent anti-Brexit campaigner, it's in the papers today. She had a business account at Monzo. That's been closed, will be closed from September. Now, Monzo is saying, actually, that was a mistake. You should never have had that. We don't have accounts for political parties. But it's interesting. There's many, many ordinary people, plenty of MPs saying they've had problems getting bank accounts, but many, many ordinary people saying that their accounts have been closed abruptly, that they've been given no explanation. And you really, in this day and age, you can't manage without a bank account, can you? So it does seem like this is the tip of the iceberg. And, OK, dreadful for NatWest. They've had £1 billion wiped off their share, their value. But more broadly, I think it's going to lead to probably a fair few changes in the financial
I think more names are going to come out saying I was debunked. Because, again, Nigel made the point that it was something that's been happening for a while, but people are almost ashamed to admit that they've been debunked because it implies there's something appalling about them. So they haven't told the world. And now it may well come out that a lot more people have been debanked and never given an explanation. In other words, the banks have acted very arrogantly.
Yes, and it's all very well diversity and inclusion, but what does inclusion mean? Because what's happening is a lot of people appear to be being excluded because the bank has decreed what are acceptable views and what are not. And if you're considered that your views are not acceptable for whatever reason, you know, like some sort of morality police. Andrew Griffith, the City Minister, saying the other day, you know, he said, I hope the whole financial sector learns from this incident. Their role is to serve customers well and fairly, not to tell them what or how to think.
What I don't understand with this, and I mean, I know she's gone now, but the fact that Dame Alison Rose said she was the source of the story that the BBC ran. So she divulged that private information about Nigel's bank account, which is an absolute taboo, isn't it? She admitted that, but the board still said, we've got confidence in it. So what does that say about anybody employed by NatWest, even just if they're working on the counter and they know how much money you put in and they tell someone, they would have a defence, wouldn't they, to say, yeah, I told Jim down the pub how much Stephen Dixon gets paid every week.
Yeah. But it's not a sackable offence because Dame Alison...
It's not a sackable offence, no, because the boss has kept her job.
Well, any ordinary person, of course, would be out immediately, but this is like the top 0.1%. It does seem...
It's the precedent that it sets.
It feels, doesn't it, like different rules apply. But, of course, they shouldn't, because confidentiality, like if you go to your doctor and tell them something, they have to keep that confidential.
So how can anyone who banks at Coutts at the moment have confidence that their information is private?
Exactly. And
it's a real
also,
problem.
Nigel Farage said that before he went public, he had gone to Peter Flavell twice. He'd got in touch twice asking to speak to him and had no comment back. And also, I mean, it's slightly murky what Dame Alison Rose did or didn't say. But again, the BBC have come back and Nigel Farage has said the BBC did the right thing. Of course, they were right to report it. He blames totally NatWest. But the BBC also said, we went back to Dame Alison Rose to say, you know, what we were going to say, and there was no comeback. So it's, one rule for 99.9% of the population, and it seems like a different rule for us.
It's a murky, horrible mess.
It doesn't look good at all. It just makes you feel that they really are arrogant at the top of banking.
It does.
And they feel they can set the rules and they're not. They don't have to say anything to anyone.
But I do think the consequences of this, obviously the story has been rumbling along for several weeks now. It's sort of come to a head. But there is going to be an investors meeting, NatWest, at 9:30, which I will be watching over Zoom. So we will see what they say, because this will be the first time that Sir Howard Davies, the chairman, has faced investors. I don't think his position is safe, but I think there will be big consequences, not just for NatWest, but across the banking sector, because the government have made it very plain that this is unacceptable, and I think legislation likely to follow.